Hello there. I hope you're doing well. Welcome back to the web development series. This is lesson 4, I believe, and in today's lesson, we're going to study about CSS. So, let's start with talking about CSS. So, let's start with a basic introduction to CSS. What exactly is CSS? Thus far, we've learned about tables, forms, basic HTML, how to write headings, paragraphs, links, images, all of that. But if you look at those web pages that we created, they're very bland. They lack styling. You'll never want to interact with a website that looks like that. So this is where CSS comes in. CSS is a language that just adds styling to your website. So you can think of HTML as a gray structure house with just the bricks, no paint, nothing. And as soon as you start designing that house, as soon as you hire an interior designer who comes in and tells you what color should the walls be, what color should the furniture be, all of that, that is considered styling. And that is considered CSS in web development, because it allows you to add style to your website. So your website looks good, looks appealing to the users who are going to use it, and you can be just proud about your work. So I can show you a small example. For instance, let's go to apple.com. If you go to this website, it's a very nice looking website. Very clean, very easy to use. Amazing website. If I right click and click on inspect, and I scroll at the very top, select the head section and delete it, this is what happens to the website. The reason this happens is because the styling to this website is linked in the head section. So by removing the head section, I've removed all the styling for this website. And without any styling, this website, the most beautiful looking website, looks like this. So this should give you confidence that you're at the right pace of learning how to build websites. So this should give you an idea of why styling is so important, because if this is how Apple's website looked, I don't think they would be a $1 billion company that they are today. So let's learn about styling. I'll go to lesson 2. Actually, let's create a copy. Let's go to desktop, duplicate this, and turn this to lesson 3, because we're going to use some of the same stuff. Okay, and I want to open this folder. I have this folder now. Don't worry about this. It's fine. I can just get rid of this. Delete. Now, this is how you should, if you followed from the previous lessons, this is how your folder should look like. One thing I want to talk about before we start today's lesson is extensions in VS Code. Now, if you followed the previous videos, you might have seen that every single time I write code and I want to see it, I have to go and refresh the browser, the web page in the browser to see the changes. To avoid that, what we're going to use today is an extension. So if you go to this icon on VS Code and search for live server, this is the extension, and click on install, and that's about it. As soon as you install this, what happens is I can go to a file, any file, and just click on go live. As soon as I click on go live, the web page opens up, and any changes that I make here, login now, will immediately be displayed. So now that we have that set up, we can start with our introduction to CSS. So the login web page looks something like this. If you click on it, you can see there's a heading, there's a hyperlink, and there's a form that allows you to log in. Let's assume that I want to change the way the heading looks. So for example, I want the heading to be yellow in color. Okay, so how can we do that? We can implement this through CSS. And one way of implementing CSS is called inline CSS. I can write it down here. Inline CSS. What does that mean? Whatever element you have, for example, I want to change the color of this specific element. So I'd go to this element and there's an attribute called style that allows you to apply CSS to this specific element. Now, when we write CSS, the way we write it is that there is a property and there's a value. So for instance, to change the color of this element, there's a property called color. Okay, this is the property name. So anytime you want to change the color, you would use the property name color. So color, and then I have to provide a value. The value, for example, will be yellow because I want to change it to yellow. This is an example of how CSS is written. There's a property and there's a value. And the way we separate these two is we put a colon in the middle and a semicolon at the end to denote that this is the end of this CSS property. So here all we're saying is please change H1. Please change the color of H1 to yellow. Color is the property to change the text of the element. If I save this, we go back. I don't even have to refresh because of that extension, the live server extension, but you can see the color is yellow now. I mean, I cannot really see this color, so let's try to change the background of this element as well. So I want to also change the background color of this element. So what I can do is right after the semicolon, I can add background color, which is basically the property that is used to change the background color of the element. So background color should be, let's say, green. Okay. If we save that, refresh, no need to refresh actually, you can see that the color is yellow and the background color is green. The reason it is taking the whole width is because heading is a block element, so it always takes the full width. And yeah, that is how you would basically change styling or add styling to an element through inline CSS. This is good, but what happens if I have another heading? For example, I have another heading here, H1, and let's call it something like contact us, just for demonstration purposes. And I want this heading to have the same styling as this heading. One way of doing that is you can say I can add the same styling there. So I can copy the style attribute from this element and I can add it here. And that way it will take the same styling, which is correct. It is correct way of doing that. But if you have a web page and it has like, let's say 10 headings, you don't want to go to each of those headings and, copy paste the style attribute, because what happens if you want to update the values? For example, now I don't want it to be yellow, I want it to be red. So if I change red here, I have to go and change it everywhere else, which is not very consistent. And especially when you have really big websites, this is not sustainable. So what we can do instead is we can go to the head section and there's a tag called style. Okay. This represents that you're going to define some CSS within the HTML file. So what you can do here is you can add CSS for all the H1 elements. It would look something like this. You specify which element you want to style. So in our case, we want to style h1. So you would write h1 space and then signify the start and the end. This is just to signify that this is the starting of the style and this is the ending of the style for h1. And within that, you write all the properties that you need. So I want the color to be red, and I want the background color to be green. Okay, save that. And now you can get rid of the inline styles. Usually we never use the inline style. We very, very rarely use it. All your styling has to be written in another way, which I'll show you, but for now, just remember inline styles are not the best way to write styling. So if I save that, you can see the styling is applied already for both of the h1. I've removed them from here, but because I have the style tag, it goes to all the h1 elements and it adds all of these properties that I've mentioned here. So again, if in the future I had to add another h1 example for instance, it will take the same styling. I don't even have to worry about it. This is a better way of adding CSS. But then there's another problem. Let's say I go to sign up. Sign up also has a heading, right? But it's not taking any styling from the styles that we listed here for the login page. That is because the style tag only exists for login.html. What if I wanted all the headings in my website, no matter what page they are on, all of them to have h1? All of them to have the same h1 styling. What would happen? How should I do that? For that, we create a separate file called the CSS file. So let's create a new file called styles.css. This is how we usually name it, styles.css. That is supposed to have all of your styles in this specific style sheet, and then you can link it to all your HTML pages. How do we do that? First of all, let's try to bring this style from here to styles.css. And now we can get rid of the style tag because the CSS has been moved to styles.css. Save that. If you go back to login, you will notice that the styling is gone, which is because the CSS has been moved to styles.css. Now, whenever you want to use this CSS file, you need to link it within your HTML. How do we do that? Within the head section, create a link. The relationship should be defined using rel, which is that this file that you're going to link is basically the style sheet. And then you need to provide where is this file. The file is called styles.css. And this is also a self-closing tag, so that's how you will close it. Now, as soon as I add this line, you'll see that it has taken the styling. If I go to, let's say, sign up and do the same thing, link relation should be style sheet, and href is styles.css, you will notice that even the sign up takes the style now. This is how we usually add styles in our websites. You will create a separate CSS file called styles.css and add all your CSS styling here, and finally link that style sheet to your index.html, any HTML page. This is the reason when you inspect this page and get rid of the head section, the styling goes away because your style sheet is linked within the head section. So that is about creating a style sheet. Now we can spend some time to see the different properties that are available in CSS and how we can use them to style our HTML. So we looked at color, we looked at background color. There is also something called text align, and this just aligns your text. So for example, if I say center and I save that, you can see the text is now at the center. You can look at the login page. The text is now in the center. If I were to write right, so text align right, that would mean move the text to the right side. There is also something called end, which is the same as right. So if you can use that, if you want to use that, you can use that. So there are different ways you can align your text, and you can see that option as soon as you write text align, it will give you all of these options to choose from. And this is just a matter of, trying and testing things out for yourself. Right now, let's just choose center so that it is in the center. So that's text align. There's also something called font weight. Font weight is just how bold the text is going to be. So for instance, we can say, because H1 is already bold, let's pick another element here. We can pick the labels here. Okay. Now, how can I add a styling for label? Let's close this. Using the label element. So I can just say for the label, make the font weight, let's say bolder. And you can see now it is a bit darker than it was before. That's because we changed it to bolder. And there are all these different numbers that you can use which signify different things. For example, 400, if you notice, it's not that dark, but if you use, let's say 700, it's a bit darker. So it's a matter of just playing around with those numbers and seeing what different numbers do when you use them in CSS. So that's font weight. The next we have is called text decoration, and this is just some decorations that you can apply to your element's font. So whatever the font or the text is in your element, you can apply some decoration to it. For example, you can say that it is line through, and this is how it would look like. Let me just zoom in a little bit. It will have this strike through appearance, or you can say underline as well, which will add an underline to the text. And again, just like the other things, there are different, just like the other properties, there are different things that you can add. For example, I can even add wavy, and you will notice, save that. Oh, it should be underline and then wavy. Yeah, so the wavy thing is just for the underline. So you can make the underline either wavy, or you can make it dotted and it will be dotted. So there are many different ways you can do this. Again, it will depend on your practice. The more you practice, the more you will know. That's everything IT is about. Now for text decoration, you can even add a color. So for example, I want it to be green in color. So you can notice that, I don't know if it's very visible. Let's make it yellow. Oh, that's not even visible. Red. Yes. So you can see that the color of the underline is changed as well. Or even if it was line through, the same thing happens. So that is text decoration. There's another property called line. Actually, let's do it with another element. So we have labels, but I want to add a paragraph with lorem, some random text, and save that, and if you refresh, you can see there's a paragraph with all of this text. Now, one of the properties that is available for text is called line height. Okay, line height basically dictates the or controls the height of the line. So for example, if I say make it 4.5, you can notice that the spacing between each of these lines is around 4 times the normal spacing that was there before. So in the beginning, there was a normal spacing. We've changed that to 4 times the normal spacing. We can even use something called normal that will set the normal spacing between each of the lines, or we can use whatever number we want. We can even say make it 10 times the normal spacing, and now you can see there's a lot of spacing between the lines, and this is specifically only applied to the paragraph element at the moment. There's also something called, and even if you change it to, for example, 1, or let's say 0.5, you will see that now the spacing is so less that it's kind of like merged into each other and not at all readable. So you can use any of those numbers to, design the way you want it to be. There's another property called letter spacing, which basically dictates the space between the letters. Here you have to specify the unit along with the number of spacing that you want. For example, if I want there to be 10 spaces, for instance, I need to say that it's 10 pixels, because that's the unit we use to specify spacing. There are many other units as well, but we'll leave that for later. For now, let's just focus on pixels, which is the basic unit used in CSS. So if I save this, you can see that there is a lot of space between all the letters, to the point you cannot really read what is there. And then you can even change it to another number called 2, whatever number you want. And you can even use normal, which is the normal letter spacing that is available. So that is about letter spacing. Now, one of the other properties that we have is called font size, which dictates the size of the font. So for example, we can keep it as very, very small. If you go back, you can see that the text size is a bit small. You can even specify the exact size by describing, by denoting the number. So for example, I can make it 15 pixels, and 15 pixels is this size. If you write it as, let's say, 1 pixel, it's going to be very, very small, barely visible. You can see it if you zoom a lot into it. You can then kind of read it, but it's not at all useful, this size. So 15 pixel is usually the normal size, font size. And you can even have larger, large. These are just different sizes that are available for font sizing. And if we refresh, this is large basically. Oh, okay. Why do we have 2 of them? That is the basic styling. You can even style the hyperlinks. For example, I can write A, and then I can say the font size for them should always be, let's say, 20 pixels, and the color, let's not change the color, let's say the font weight would be bolder. And if you save that, you can see it's a bit bigger now and bolder. So yeah, you can add anything, any styling to whatever you want. The best place to read more about CSS is MDN, and go to CSS, and this is where you can literally read everything about CSS that there is. Usually very helpful if this is your first time coding in CSS. And yeah, I think one thing I forgot to mention, that when you write the CSS, this is called the selector. It is considered an element in HTML, but when you write it in CSS, we call it a selector. So h1 is a selector, label is a selector, paragraph is a selector, anchor tag is a selector. So all of these are just selectors. There is something called a universal selector as well. We denote it using a star, and we can, for instance, say the background color should be aquamarine. Save that, and if you go back, the background color of this page is now aquamarine. I can even set, for instance, the font size to be 20 pixels, and just remove it from here so you can see the effect that it's going to have. Save that, and you go back now, every text that is there on this page is 20 pixel. So the purpose of the star or the universal selector is that whatever you define here will be the setting for every single element or every single other selector in your HTML page. So whatever you have, whatever elements you have in any of the HTML pages will have the font size as 20 pixels. I can show it to you in another scenario. So for example, the color, let's make it red. Okay. If you go back, literally everything is red now. The button, the labels, the text and the button, literally everything is red because of the universal selector. So whenever you put the star and you put any properties, it is going to be set for literally everything on the web page. Now we're just writing these color names which are available by default, but you can even have colors represented through hex. So for example, hash FFF. This is white color. Okay, I didn't write it as white, but this is a way of representing color in the color system that exists. I can even change all of it to 0. Usually we have 6 digits here, and they can be made up of numbers and characters. If you refresh, everything is black. You can even change it to gray, and this is gray, barely visible. Now you'll notice that everything's changed to gray, but the headings are still in red. That is because after the universal selector, we've specified the color directly in H. So what is going to happen, H1 by default had this color, but because we've specified it again here, it overrides that. So instead of now H1 having the gray color, what it has is red color. That's the only thing. So if you can override the property. So for example, in the paragraph, I can even write the color to be purple. Okay, and now it is purple. Even though the universal selector says the color should be this, I can override it directly in another selector as well. So usually in the universal selector, what you will keep is the basic styling for the page. That is what will be kept there. Okay, so that is about some of the basics of CSS. Again, this is very, very basic. We will look into more things in the upcoming videos. But what we can do now is do some sort of a practice, and let me show you what we're trying to build. If we go to something called practice.html, this is something I would like you to try and practice. You can do it the way you want, but this is one way of, practicing CSS. What I want you to do, or what I did for creating this page, was I went to CSS and I just copied some of the sections from here to build this page here. So, and give them a few headings. So I had CSS Introduction, syntax, and then style sheet. So this is how the final result should look like. I'll suggest that you pause the video here and try to do this on your own. It's using all the properties, the CSS properties that we have studied, but I can tell you in HTML, this is H1. All of these texts are paragraphs. This is H2 and this is H3. That's all that is being used. And the background color here is beige. So I would recommend that you pause the video here, try it out on your own, and then when you're done or when you're confident with your answer, you can come back and see how to build this. So I'll create a new file here. I'll name it CSS intro.html, CSS intro practice.html. Add the boilerplate code, call it CSS intro practice, and then add H1, which is CSS introduction. CSS introduction, add the paragraph. The first paragraph is this. Then there's another paragraph element, which is this one. And then another heading, which is H2. So H2 syntax, it has one paragraph, which is this. It doesn't really have to make sense. Like the text you're putting here doesn't really have to make sense. We're just trying to practice adding styles to HTML pages. Oh, this is not paragraph. This is H3, which is style sheet, and another paragraph for this. If we go back, refresh, actually this is CSS intro practice, and this is how it looks. Without style, without any styling, this is how it looks, and we need to make it look like this. The first thing you would notice that there's a background color, right? So there is some color, which I said in the beginning, it's the beige color. So since all of this is basically the body, if I can show it to you, we've written all of this within the body element, right? So in the styles, actually, let me just remove all of this. In the styles.css that we have, I'm going to add the body as a selector here and add the background color as beige. So if you now go back and refresh, nothing is going to happen because this is a new HTML file and we need to link the style sheet. So relation should be style sheet and href should be styles CSS. Save that, and now you have a beige color at the background. So we're done with one thing. Now you will notice that all the headings that are added here are basically green in color. So what we can do is we can go back and say H1, the color should be green. H2, the color should be green. And H3, also the color should be green. If we go back, all the headings now have green color. But I don't like the fact that we've written the same thing 3 times. So the color green, we've written it multiple times, right? In CSS, what you can do is you can just group selectors using a comma. So I can say H1, H2, H3, all of them are going to have the color green, and it has the same effect. It is still green in color. Then the text is centered, right? So I can say center, text align, center. So if we see this, the headings are now at the center. The same thing needs to be done for the paragraph. The paragraph also has to be aligned center. So I can add the paragraph selector and say text align should be center. So refresh, and now the text is centered. One thing I missed out for the heading is that all the headings have a underline, wavy underline, which is red in color. So we can add the text decoration, add a red underline, which is wavy. If you save that, refresh, it all now has a red underline. Now, one difference that I see is the paragraphs are, the font weight is bold, like it's darker, and there's a little bit of spacing between all the lines. So we can add that using font weight. So font weight can be, for example, bold, and I think it is bold. Yes, font weight is bold, and the line height, I'm not sure what I gave it, but the line height 2 times, and yeah, it's now identical. So it just took us this amount of CSS code to make it a little more styled compared to how it looked initially. So I think that's it for this video. What we've looked at today is very basic CSS. In the next videos on CSS, we'll go into a little bit more depth and practice how CSS is actually written for websites generally. And so yeah, if you have any questions, you can leave them down in the comment section, and I will try my best to get back to that. And yeah, see you in the next one.